name is Alex Sagers, Director of Education for Louisiana Right to Life, and welcome to the second part of our series, Lighting the Way to a Post-Roe Louisiana. This is going to be an awesome discussion on adoption with our Director of Adoption Education, Sarah Zagorski, who is also our Communications Director, with Lori Arceneuax. Did I say her last name right, Sarah? I think I did. With Lori, who is the head of the adoption program at Volunteers of America, and she'll be joining as soon as she gets out of a meeting. And David Scotton, who is like the movie star now. He is great, and we're going to be introducing everyone even more so. But this session's webinar, as you all know who have joined, you've probably seen the promotion. This is the truth about adoption, telling real stories, dispelling myths, and making sure that we spread public education on adoption. I mean, it's kind of special today. Today's Giving Tuesday. I hope everyone had a very wonderful Thanksgiving last week. And today being Giving Tuesday, one of our major pillars of Louisiana Right to Life, especially going forward post-Roe, is that we are making sure to spread the education about infant adoption. And especially as our Director of Adoption Education is going to talk about, we believe so strongly that thorough education on infant adoption throughout all of Louisiana will greatly help the resources that women have access to and greatly help, the abortion numbers go down of women traveling out of state and getting the abortion pill if they can know and thoroughly understand that if they're not ready to parent, it's okay. There are other options. And within adoption, there's so many different courses that she can take and Sarah's going to cover this, the ratio between adoption and abortion is drastic, and that's because of the stigma that it has carried. First of all, what I wanted to show everyone before we thoroughly got started is something that we're doing to help with the public education of adoption is, and resources for women in general, is working with this woman. Her name is Kim. Many of you maybe have heard of her. She's done a lot of speaking, and she's helping us with adoption education. We just did this wonderful, beautiful video of her sharing her testimony, giving her story, and helping us promote our website that connects women to their local pregnancy centers, adoption agencies, and other social services called findhelpla.com. Save that in your phones. That's a great resource for women in crisis pregnancies, and just to know for yourself what resources are near you for women. So this incredible video by Kim, it was just posted on our Facebook page today, so it hasn't fully taken off yet, but we are putting money behind it to make sure it's seen by as many people as possible. Not only is it on our individual Facebook and Instagrams, but it's being promoted in ads all over social media in 15 seconds and 30 seconds and 1-minute versions. So, Giving Tuesday, if you're called to give and help, that message get out there, especially across social media or in our general Advertise for Life campaign, that is awesome. Thank you so much for considering giving. But if you can't give, the major way that you can help those funds really be used well is by sharing that video and making sure that it gets out there and that money is used wisely. So I wanted to show you this video first, and then I'll hand it off to Sarah to talk thoroughly about adoption. So give me a moment while I figure out how to share my screen.
Alex, somebody put in the question box that they aren't able to hear anymore.
Let's see. Oh, is that Lori? Hi, Lori. Okay, for the other attendees, is there other attendees who cannot hear, or is this a singular issue? Before I show this video, I want to make sure that y'all can hear it.
Thank you, Lori, for pointing that out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see that now. Let's see if there's any sort of setting on here. Is there can anyone else tell me that they can either hear it? You can type, this is also a good thing for me to tell you if you can hear me. There's a chat box. Let's see. Okay, and we have another person saying that they can hear. That's good.
In my experience with Zoom, if all else fails, maybe the person who can't hear can log off and log back on.
Okay, let me type that answer. Thank you so much. Okay.
Because they might have just forgot to press like enable microphone or something.
By logging. off and logging back on. And they say our chat is disabled. Wonderful. We are just doing so great here tonight. Well, if you do have questions for all of our speakers or for me throughout, you can type in your question in the Q&A section. So you go to your, like the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A thing and you can type it in there. For some reason, our chat is disabled and that wasn't the case at our last one. And I'm not exactly sure how to fix it. So you can type it there. I can be checking our Louisiana to Life email, info@prolifelouisiana.org. That's info@prolifelouisiana.org. If you have pertinent questions that you really want to ask during this, and I will make sure that we get to them. But yes, please. Good. People are saying that they can use the Q&A. Great. So yes, please take advantage of that. Ask speakers questions as we go along. And let me go ahead and share this video. I apologize for the chat. There we go. Okay. Let me turn up my volume for everyone. All right, here is the video of Kim giving her testimony.
At 15, I got pregnant in high school. I felt like my life was over and considered abortion. I even went to my first appointment at a Louisiana abortion clinic because I felt like I had no other choice. Thankfully, a family member recommended I consider adoption instead. I placed my baby boy for adoption, and now he's a graduate of LSU and thriving. I have a beautiful family today. I'm married with 3 more sons, and I'm close to my birth son and his adopted family. The life I have today is because of the gift of adoption, without the violence and regret of abortion. I learned that there was love and support out there through Louisiana resources, and I didn't have to end the life of my baby in order to continue school and pursue the life that I wanted. Adoption is a beautiful option.
So that is our incredibly beautiful video of Kim sharing her testimony. Please, if you think about it tonight, go ahead and hop on now on our social media, on our Facebook or Instagram, and give it a share so that we can make sure as many people see it as possible. So without further ado, I want to hand you over to our Director of Adoption Education and Communications Director, Sarah Zagorski, and she'll more fully introduce herself as well.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Yes. So I want to start with my, I know Kim very well. Kim and I are great friends, but I want to start too with my own personal story and why I'm passionate about advancing infant adoption. So I spent almost 8 years in Louisiana's foster care system. And during that process, my birth mother lost her parental rights. The state terminated her parental rights as a parent. And it was very grievous and difficult to watch her suffer through that process. She had no information about infant adoption or what modern infant adoption looks like today. And I know Lori's probably going to talk about that in a little bit, but she had no resources or the ability to find out what she could have done differently during her own struggles and her life situation. So she was Hispanic. She was a woman who struggled with mental illness. She had 10 children. And I was one of 11 in total. And in the process, the majority of her children spent time in foster care and also in group homes. It was very sad and very hard to watch. But through that process, I thought back on her life and I reflected on her life and I thought, what could have been different about her story? And I think the difference could have been if she would have had access to information early on in her life about her options in regards to infant adoption. If she would have known, for example, that in infant adoption today, that you can have a relationship with your child, that you can have an ongoing relationship with your child, and you can make an adoption plan. But she didn't have any of that information. And that's what really led me to my passion for adoption. And that led me to create a curriculum with Louisiana Right to Life called Option Hope, which that curriculum, the goal of that curriculum is to get information in the hands of high school students prior to ever experiencing a crisis pregnancy the information to know what their options are if they face an unplanned pregnancy. Now in Louisiana, we have the latest statistics show that we've had over 7,000 abortions, 7,444 abortions this last year in 2019, I believe. And now those women, because of the reversal of Roe, will need information on adoption. They will need it right now. And our goal is to get that information in the hands of high school students. And I think my passion from seeing my birth mother suffer through that is what's led me to create this curriculum and to make sure students understand that adoption is a viable option for them. In the adoption process, and I know Lori probably will elaborate on this some more. They can choose an open, a closed, a mediated adoption. They can make a choice for themselves, and it's a brave, courageous choice for a birth mother to place their child for adoption. And I think that one of the most important aspects of this to remember is there's a reason these misconceptions exist. So I want to cover that kind of briefly. So in the past, before modern adoption today, there was an era in time where adoption was not like it is now. There was an era called the orphan train era, where this was in the 1800s, where children, orphans, would be put on cattle cars and sent to train stations. And they would be put there, and basically families would pick them up. They would select a child. That led to a variety of problems. Some of those problems included like boys being picked over girls, older children being picked more because they could work on rural farms, etc. It just led to a variety of issues. And then there was also the baby scooping era, which wasn't that long ago. Unfortunately, it was in the 70s and 80s when women would go to maternity homes, and unfortunately, they would lose rights to their child without even necessarily knowing that. Lori, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a really horrible time in adoption history where these children would be essentially taken from their birth mother without their permission or the complete knowledge, without complete consent. So that history, unfortunately, has darkened culture's perception of adoption. And I think this is very important as we look at it today, because modern adoption is nothing like this now. Modern adoption today has an ethical process, and it ensures that birth mother has rights in the adoption process, that she can pick her birth family, that she can decide if that adoptive family will be in the room when even she gives birth. There's so many decisions that mother can make now, that mother and that father can make now, that are different than in the past. And that's really important to remember. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of that history. Another couple of misconceptions I wanted to mention is many women, and this is from the National Council of Adoption, these are studies that have come out that have shown the top misconceptions about adoption. That one, that a birth parent will never see their child again, that the adoption process is too expensive for the birth parents, and that if they place their child for adoption, they'll somehow end up in the foster care system. So these are some of the top misconceptions about adoption, and those are really the ones that I think stunt and inhibits women and their partners from choosing adoption. And in fact, this is what the statistic that Alex shared earlier, or she didn't share, but she mentioned. So nationally, for every 100 abortions in the country, there are only 2 infant adoption placements. And I believe that's directly tied to the culture we live in, which kind of sees adoption as a negative choice. Only half of Americans, or about half of Americans, see adoption as a positive choice for families. And this is why this education is so important. So that's kind of my brief overview about misconceptions. Again, my passion is from seeing my birth mother suffer through losing her rights as a parent and wishing something could have been different for her. But feel free to ask me any questions about that, and I'm willing to talk more with Lori. I know she's an expert on this, and with David as well as an adoptee. We can't hear you, Alex.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions or they want to, type in the chat for Sarah, feel free. Yeah, Sarah, I feel you can probably go ahead and introduce Lori if you'd like.
Sure. Lori Arceneuax is a great friend of mine. She's a social worker with Volunteers of America. She runs their adoption and maternity branch, and I think she has had a lot of experience with birth parents and with adoptees, and as also an adopted parent herself. I just thought she was an important person to add to this conversation to kind of talk about the adoption process and what modern adoption looks like today and what women actually have access to today if they were to choose adoption.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Alex, for inviting me to be here to talk with you guys this evening. So as Sarah said, my name is Lori Arceneuax. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been with Volunteers of America for over 18 years. It's still hard for me to wrap my head around that number. But my work with Volunteers of America changed my life, not only professionally, but personally as well, because it was with my work with Volunteers of America that I even thought about the option of adoption for creating my family. And so my daughter was adopted from foster care, which is obviously a different path, but so it's much different now being a social worker, working with individuals, walking the journey of adoption. Now that I'm personally connected to it, definitely gives you a much different perspective. As Sarah shared, the process of adoption has changed dramatically over the last many decades. Volunteers of America has been doing adoption in New Orleans for over 75 years. And as you can imagine, in 75 years, adoption looks a lot different than it did when we first began. Years ago, when women were facing an unplanned pregnancy, it was very much a stigma to be unmarried and pregnant. And so women didn't really have a whole lot of options. This is before the option of pregnancy termination was even available. And so basically women either had to hurry up and marry the father to make the child seem legitimate, or women were sent to a maternity home. We operated maternity homes for many years, and women would get sent to a maternity home, most often outside of their own communities and cities, because everything was about maintaining this secret. And, you know, women were not really empowered to make decisions. They were counseled, but I wouldn't say they were counseled in the way we provide counseling now. They were sort of counseled as to why they should place the child for adoption, and weren't really given any other options. Closed adoptions was the only type of options available. Women were often discouraged from even holding the baby or seeing the baby in the hospital, naming the baby. And as you can imagine, you know, this left a lot of women devastated and grieving, of wondering whatever happened to their child. They were told, you know, you'll go on, you'll have other children, you'll be fine. Well, as you can imagine, it's not that simple, right? Our emotions are not so black and white. And so women were often left with these holes in their heart of trying to figure out, did I do the right thing? Is my child happy? Are they angry with me? And then adopted persons as well sort of grew up with questions, right? I'm not adopted, so I can look in the mirror and say I have my mom's eyes or dad's smile or this mannerism. And children who were adopted often want the same answers to those questions. And so as we know better, hopefully we do better. And so with that, openness in adoption started to evolve, and to where now women and men considering adoption have many more options available. They're now empowered to make decisions for them, meaning that they not only can pick a family, but they can meet the family, they can make a plan for follow-up contact. Openness is a very personal and unique journey. It's something that everyone has to decide what is best for them. Some people choose to have minimal contact. Some people want more contact. Sometimes they want more and then eventually want less, and vice versa. I kind of like to refer to it as an evolving process, because what may work for someone now may look a little different 6 months from now, a year from now. And so there's all different sorts of options available. Sometimes there's some confusion about openness, because people will say, well, isn't that confusing to the child? Won't they be confused that they have two sets of parents? Well, the adoptive parents are always the parents, right? They're the ones who are raising the child and giving that child, you know, stability and love and nurturing. The birth parents will always be the ones who brought the child into this world, but their relationship sort of shifts. And so they're not necessarily considered the parent anymore or in a parental role. And so to me, it doesn't make it more confusing for the child. It actually makes the child less confused, because they may have more information and answers to their questions than people may have had to wait years and decades. You know, over the last 18 years I've worked in adoption, for example, the process of DNA has evolved, to where now people are connecting in ways that they didn't have the opportunity to do before. So openness really can be a positive for a woman considering adoption for her child, so that it doesn't have to be the forever goodbye that it was years ago, that she may not be in a position to provide that child with the life she wants him or her to have, but she is able to see that child either from a distance, meaning maybe she just wants to keep in touch through pictures or email, what have you, or she may want a closer relationship where she actually gets to visit and see the child firsthand and that sort of thing. Sometimes people are also confused about openness because they assume that openness means like that the birth parent just comes to their house for a big old barbecue, and or like, what if the birth parent were to sort of cross certain boundaries and things like that. And to me, openness is just like any other relationship in life, whether it's a friendship or romantic relationship. It sort of grows and evolves over time. So for relationships to grow and evolve, usually they don't start out completely open. They tend to start more semi-open and then grow and evolve over time, as is the right fit for everyone. Openness is not co-parenting. So through the counseling we provide to women considering adoption, we educate them to help them to understand that having openness does not mean that they will have decisions about where the child will go to school or what hobbies or interests they'll be interested in. Openness is not co-parenting. It's being able to develop a relationship with the child. With Volunteers of America, we offer free counseling to women facing an unplanned pregnancy who want to explore their options regarding counseling. I've had people ask me over the years, well, you work for an adoption agency. Aren't you trying to talk people into adoption? And I'm like, I'm a social worker. I'm not a used car salesman. My personal and professional ethics are that I am trying to not give answers to people or steer them to answers, but rather to help them have a safe place where they can sort of put the options on the table and kind of help them to decide what's best for them. Volunteers of America is a faith-based organization. We are a non-denominational church and a nonprofit. So when I say options, we're looking at the options of parenting and adoption. But we can't say for certain if adoption is the right choice for this person or that person. But we help them look at what would make parenting an option, what would make parenting a challenge, what about adoption, what would that look like, so that she can hopefully get the answer she needs to make the most informed decision for herself and for her child. Working for an adoption agency, sometimes people look at when you have an adoption, then that equals you've had a success. But I look at it as, even for women who choose to parent, it's still a success, because hopefully she's now had the time, the consideration, the counseling, that she's hopefully made a better plan for parenting than she would have beforehand. So to me, it's sort of a success no matter what the woman chooses. Sarah had touched on the stigma or misconceptions about birth moms, and I will say that that is something that unfortunately still exists. In my experience, I'm an adopted parent. When I share that with people, people will often say, that's so wonderful, you're so great, But let's say hypothetically, I placed a child for adoption when I was in college, and I would share that I was a birth mom. People don't often have that same reaction to birth moms of how wonderful, how brave. It's usually, oh, that's so nice, And I feel like people sort of look at birth parents as sort of these two-headed creatures that they don't understand. And to me, I think about the countless number of birth parents I've worked with over the years, and I've not had one person say, Lori, I want to place my child for adoption because I don't want it, I don't care, I don't want to be bothered. It's always a decision made out of complete love and sacrifice, that if only this circumstance were different, if only I had this, if only this were different, that they come to that decision. And so even doing this for as long as I have now, I'm still humbled and in awe of the amount of selflessness that it goes into the decision of adoption. And so I wish as a society as a whole, we could sort of look at birth parents in that same esteem as we do adopted parents, of saying how wonderful, how brave to give that same recognition to birth parents, because I feel like in the women that I work with, that is sometimes definitely a hindrance to them considering adoption, because they often worry about, what will my family think? What will my friends think? What kind of person places their child for adoption? And so it's just something I think we have made some progress with, but I think work definitely still has to be done.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple things. Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is, I think, Lori, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like up to 90% now of adoptions include some kind of openness. That's what the data shows. That majority of women who choose an adoption plan choose openness in their adoption plan. The second thing I want to elaborate on is, and Alex and I have talked about this extensively, there's a lot of misconception about the cost of adoption. And a lot of birth parents feel afraid to place their baby for adoption because they're concerned about the cost of adoption. But what they don't recognize is that cost is actually on the adoptive family in an infant adoption placement. And that's usually for a good reason. So a lot of agencies that promote infant adoption and that work with birth parents provide that woman with legal counsel, medical care, care during her pregnancy, even education help, living costs. There's a long list of things that they help her with. So the cost is actually on that adoptive family. And that's why that cost is so high. A lot of people, we get questions all the time at Louisiana Right to Life, like, why is adoption so expensive? But it's important to note, one, that it's expensive for the adoptive family, and Louisiana Right to Life has worked on like tax credits for the adoptive family and different initiatives to try to support a family that's looking to adopt. But also it's important for birth parents to know that that cost is not on them, that it's actually on that adoptive family. So I just wanted to touch on those two things as I was listening to you talk about a couple of those issues.
Right. And you also mentioned, Sarah, that some birth parents who consider adoption are fearful that adoption means their child will end up in foster care and that sort of thing. Most agencies, including ours, we have families waiting to be picked by an expectant mother considering adoption. We'd rather have families waiting than a child waiting. So about a third of our placements are the result of a mom who goes to the hospital, delivers, and then contacts us. You know, as a mental health professional, I can tell you that denial is an amazing coping skill when we need it to be. And for some women, they may be scared, frightened, alone, facing an unplanned pregnancy. They might not know where to go, where to turn. And so their first contact with us may be at the hospital. And one of the first questions many of those women have is, am I still going to be able to place my child for adoption? Does my child now have to go into the system because I didn't act on this sooner? And I explain, we absolutely always have families waiting because we never know when a mom will contact us to consider adoption. So even for women who wait until the child is born, there's still the time and the option for her to make the best plan for her child. And she is empowered to be in the driver's seat of that process. That, you know, years ago, women were just sort of told, do this, do that. And now it's always about, what would you like? These are the options, because we want women to feel, to take ownership of that decision and to feel empowered that they were in control of that decision fully. So that's something else that's definitely very different.
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify too. I had a very amazing experience in my foster care story. I had a great foster care family. I was only in a few homes before my primary placement. So I don't have negative things to say about foster care, but I do have this to say. I think the permanence adoption provides is what a child needs. And unfortunately, foster care at times can be very traumatic for a child, jumping from home to home to home, and then also traumatic for the biological family who's trying to work on reunification with that child. So I'm not trying to say that, you know, foster care is bad. I was very fortunate in my foster care experience. But for example, I had a sister who was in over 20 foster care homes over the course of her life. And the damage that does to a child psychologically is really hard. It's immeasurable almost. I would say it's hard to even grasp, because a child needs permanence. It needs a family that's stable consistently all the time. And I think we've done great work in Louisiana to change how foster care works. But I think that one of our big pushes at Louisiana Right to Life is to ensure that women know that rather than their child later on ending up in foster care, that they could choose open adoption, for example, and have the relationship with the child that's not a parental relationship, but a relationship nonetheless, a friendship, a growing, on a scale, like you said, a relationship that changes over time, that could be much better for both the birth family and for that child. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right, Sarah. Permanency, stability, security, that's what all children need. I think of that myself for my daughter who's in college now. And I think about, gosh, if her birth parents would have chose adoption for her at birth, like what the first 8 years of her life would have been like. Right. They would have been so different. Right. And unfortunately, that's just, for whatever reason, not looked at as a positive or loving decision. Before Roe versus Wade was overturned, I've had many birth moms tell me that their families would be more accepting if they terminated the pregnancy than if they placed the child for adoption. And that's something that I always had difficulty wrapping my head around, of how is that more acceptable to your family, and they would support that than supporting you going through this immense physical and emotional journey to make sure that your child has a life you don't feel able to provide. So it's unfortunate that that not everyone has the support when they're in this situation.
And I think it's linked to that abandonment belief, right? That, that placing your baby for adoption is abandoning your child. And especially, unfortunately, largely in Hispanic and African American communities, they're very strongly against adoption. And that's, studies have shown that over time. And that was true in the case of my birth mother. And I think sometimes I've written on this and I've published on this, but sometimes I think we look at reunification with a birth family at all costs. Like that's the best for the child. But I think what's often best for the child is figuring out, are these birth parents self-aware enough to say, I cannot raise this child. I'm not, that's a brave decision. That's a courageous self-awareness that a birth mother and a birth father can have, to say, I cannot raise this child. I want someone else to raise this child. And I want to come along as a friend, or as maybe later on in life, have a relationship with this child. And that's something that I'm really an advocate for, because what we see is often really a push to reunify that child with the birth family. When I think there should be a lot more focus on, let's get women and fathers information on infant adoption, so they know that they can have that relationship without going through the foster care process, which the foster care system is already overloaded in Louisiana and nationally. So that's just, I wanted to add a couple of those notes to this too.
I wanted to answer a question that was asked in the chat about, I was told Louisiana is not licensed to do open adoption. So that's a good question. So there's not a license to do open adoptions. The only licensure in Louisiana is to be a licensed child placing agency. Openness is not legally binding in Louisiana. So that might be what the person was referring to when they said we're not licensed to do open adoption. Some states do have legally enforceable open adoption agreements. Louisiana is not one of them. So openness in adoption is merely an agreement made in good faith between both parties that this is what their plan and intention is. That is not something we take lightly, though. Meaning that in exploring with the expectant mom through the counseling we provide, we explore her expectations for openness. And in picking a family, we explore with that family that she's chosen what their expectations are. And it may require some compromise and trying to meet in the middle a little bit. If they're too far off and one person wants this and the other wants something very different, that might not be the right fit, and that's okay. Because ultimately, this is a lifelong commitment we're asking people to make, that this is ultimately, openness can sometimes be uncomfortable and not something people want to do, but ultimately it's about what's best for that child. We have to sort of remove ourselves from the situation. And I say we, as an adoptive parent, we have to remove ourselves for the situation and say what's best for our child. I remember having a conversation with an adoptive family once who wanted to sort of back off from contact with the child's birth mother and didn't necessarily have a valid reason, meaning there wasn't untreated mental health issues or substance abuse or something of that nature. And I cautioned them and said, at some point in the future, you're going to have to answer to your child as to the decisions you made in their best interest. Meaning, if you choose to cut off or step back from that contact, how will you explain that to your child later on when they ask questions, when they potentially connect with the birth parent, which, you know, is pretty common nowadays. And so we try to make sure that people don't take that commitment lightly, because it is something that legally, if the adoptive family chose to not maintain that contact, the birth parent doesn't have any recourse. And so we try to make sure people have the appropriate information, education, and support before just jumping into those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you are both just so awesome. Thank you so much for both giving so much insight on adoption. And, you know, if you have any more points that come up, that you know, feel free to jump in. You know, like as I segue into David here, I was thinking of how like there's that huge discrepancies we keep talking about in that stigma, but that, you know, causes that huge gap between adoption and abortion. And maybe Sarah, there was some stuff in Option Hope that did like a survey on this, but it's like I can't remember where I got this thought from, but you know, it's like the three options, you know, obviously abortion's technically illegal now, but the three options are like parenting, adoption, and abortion. And it's like the ranking of them, you know, like maybe it was parenting and it was like abortion and then adoption. It's like, why, you know, we need to get to the point, you know, obviously like we're talking a lot about adoption here, promoting adoption. Some people have adoption trauma in their life. Some people are like, well, it's not the solution to everyone. We agree with you. We just need to make sure that parenting and adoption are looked at as like the top options here, with abortion being behind.
Yeah. So nationally, the statistic is 0.2% of pregnancy outcomes result in an infant adoption placement, which like statistically is almost like non-existent if you think about statistics at all. And I don't want to take time away from David, because I know he's going to add so much to this conversation. But that's one of the issues, is there's so much stigma behind adoption. And a lot of people believe, just like Lori said, that it's better to terminate a pregnancy than to place a child for adoption. And that's what we're combating, right? In our culture, is this huge stigma about adoption. And my hope is that now that in Louisiana, for example, that the women that are in crisis will get the information, like from Louisiana Right to Life, from Lori, from different agencies, to know that making an adoption plan is good for them. And it's not going to mean abandoning their baby or losing any kind of connection with their child. So.
Well, thank you. So let me introduce David. He is just so awesome. I've worked with David for a while now. Whenever, you know, we were really promoting the documentary about him, I lived in Parker Avenue. I went around with him and spoke to high schools, you know, among my other coworkers, and he was just such a gift. And the students got so much from hearing David and his testimony and seeing the documentary. In case, you know, there's people who are not aware of who David is, he was placed for adoption after his birth mother left an Indiana abortion clinic in 1993. And at the age of 19, he wanted to meet his biological family. He's never known, to thank them for giving life and choosing adoption. And so he became the subject, you know, maybe he'll go in more into this, I don't know, but he, you know, through a course of events, became the subject of a documentary we did about him that kind of just grew amazingly over time. I lived at Parker Avenue. And this also became the inspiration for the movie that's been out, or that was out in theaters, called LIFEMARK, which is about David and his story. And it will be out on DVD soon. David is also a practicing attorney here in New Orleans, and he's just doing great work and continuing to speak on adoption. So David, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Alex, for having me. Look, y'all didn't need me. Y'all did an excellent job talking about everything. I mean, I got a lot out of it. And I couldn't agree with y'all more on the stigmas and you know, the statement that I think you said, Alex, or maybe it was Sarah, that it's certainly not a solution for everybody. But I can tell you, I am certainly glad that my birth mother chose adoption. She bravely left that clinic and chose life for me, and her adoption decision allowed my life to have a family. So I'll forever be thankful for adoption. And what really touched me with what y'all were sharing are the stigmas. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. You know, I remember growing up, I really never wanted people to know that I was adopted. There was something about it, you know, we would celebrate it in the house. We had, you know, my annual adoption day celebration. It was like a second birthday for me, where my grandparents would come in and they'd get a birthday card and they'd scratch out birthday and they'd put adoption day. So something we celebrated every year, but I didn't want people to know that outside the house, because I had so many experiences in school, really, with kids who would find out that I was adopted. And it was like, it would become the biggest talk of the town. Like that was like big news. And, they'd ask, well, who's your real mom, or who's your real dad? And those questions just, started to get to you as a kid when you're an adoptee. And you just want to say, I know my real mom. I know my real dad. They're Jimmy and Susan Scotton. They're my parents. They're my adoptive parents. But back then, you can't really answer honestly like that, So I remember one girl when I was in elementary school, I was on the playground and she found that I was adopted, and in front of everyone exclaimed, "So you're an orphan?" Wow. And I'll never forget that. And it wasn't the fact that she called me an orphan. It was that she didn't understand adoption. And that's really what we've been doing. And it's crazy to say 11 years because I'm only 29, but it was 11 years ago when all of this started for us, when I shared our family's adoption story for the first time in the pro-life award ceremony contest that was sponsored, by you guys, the New Orleans version. And exactly 1 month after that, we heard from my birth mother for the first time. I knew who she was. I knew her name. I had seen a picture of her and my birth father. When I was about 8, I asked for a picture, and my parents had a picture, and they showed it to me. And I said, they look like nice people. And that was it. I didn't need anything more. I didn't want anything more. I know my parents. I know my grandparents. And I don't know who my birth parents are, but I'm thankful for them. Because of them, I have my family. So I always had this passing thought. I shouldn't say always. It would happen periodically where I'd wonder who they were. And it happened most frequently when I was on family vacation or somewhere so like intimate and personal with my family, when I really just felt love. And so I'd wonder who they were, but it was never more than a thought that just came in and went out the other way. And so I'm not sure, looking back, who knows what would have happened if my birth mother hadn't reached out to the law firm that facilitated my adoption. But I'm glad she did, because 1 month after I shared it for the first time, we got that call, and that's what started our connection. And I decided to write a letter back to her. And in my letter, I asked if she had Facebook, and if she did, she could add me. And sure enough, she added me. And so we started talking on Facebook, and I realized that I had 2 full biological sisters to whom I was a big brother to. So it was a lot of emotions, coming at you at once. And thankfully, you guys, the Louisiana Right to Life, were aware of the story, and Ben Clapper approached me to have it filmed. And it took a while to say yes to that. We weren't sure we wanted to have that filmed, but thankfully we did. And so a film team came with us to Indiana to meet my birth parents for the first time. So they were actually there filming it. So you can see online, ilivetheparkerave.com, and you see my birth mother and I actually meeting for the first time. It's not staged, it's 100% real. And you see her just break down crying because she had bottled her emotions in for 2 decades. And so to her, this is a huge deal. And the first question that she asked me when we went inside was, "Do you hate me?" And I couldn't believe she asked me that, because I've never felt anything but love and appreciation for her decision, because she made a brave decision. And that was the same concern that my birth father had. So as you can see, stigmas, they don't just relate to adoptees or adoptive parents. They certainly relate to birth parents as well. And that's really what we started to address with the documentary, I Live the Parker Avenue, and now LifeMark. And I feel like we have addressed those. And I feel like the dialogue is changing, and people are starting to talk about adoption in a way that's positive. An adopted child is not less than a biological child, and adoptive parents are the true parents, and birth parents are heroes, and they need to be praised for heroes, because my birth mother and birth father, they chose life, and I'm here because of that decision.
Yeah, I can echo what David said. In high school, I had really close friends of mine ask me if I would ever wake up in bed scared, because I would look around and realize that my parents aren't really my parents. And I would look at them and say, but these are my parents. I know they've loved me my whole life through foster care. So there's a stigma that even the adoptees feel, and it's very painful. I do want to say something too that we talked about a little bit, talking about solutions, right? I'm careful to use the word solution when we talk about adoption, because everyone has a different adoption journey, and there are some adoptees that have had painful ones. I had a painful one, for example, but I would say that it was a solution in the sense of it was a life-affirming alternative to abortion, and it saved my life. That's the way in which it solved a problem, right? But it didn't solve all the trauma or the pain I experienced, or maybe the pain, David, your mother experienced. It didn't solve those problems, but it did save your life. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that language, how I talk about it as a solution, as it's a solution to choosing life and making sure that child has a future and hope to have a chance at life. And that's the way it solves a problem. But I know Lori has worked with many adopted families and adopted children, and we all know that children do suffer, and that we don't want to minimize that in any kind of capacity when we talk about adoption. So.
I just wanted to add to that, Sarah, that I think that sometimes people have the misconception too, that with pregnancy termination, problem is solved and birth, the mom moves on, everything's fine. And in working with women over the years who've experienced unplanned pregnancies, I've worked with women who chose to terminate a previous pregnancy. And oftentimes there's so much trauma and grief around that decision that they recognize that decision wasn't as cut and dry as I thought. And I, suffered the repercussions of that. And so they then, again, when facing another unplanned pregnancy, wanted to choose adoption. So obviously there's positives and negatives to every option. But I would say that in my experience, I've seen women who choose adoption, and especially who choose to have some level of openness, tend to have more positive outcomes and feel better and more empowered about their decision than women who were sort of forced or pushed into decisions, years ago based on what society felt was right and that sort of thing. So I just think it's about women being empowered to make the right decision for themselves, and us supporting that.
Yeah, and I think that when they, it's like you said in Kim's story, which I know Alex showed the video, but there's going to be more postings about that on our social media page. As you see her talk about her adoption journey, there was pain involved in her adoption journey, but at the end, right, like that, the beauty that came from that, by choosing life for her baby. She had visited Delta's abortion facility in Baton Rouge, and then had an intervention with a family member essentially, and decided to choose life and place her baby for adoption. It was hard, but now she has, I think, 3 more children. She's married. It's just a great relationship with her adopted, her birth child, who graduated from LSU, and she's so thankful for the gift of adoption today. So I think it's something we have to think about too. Adoption is something that's like a long-term process, and the women that go through that process are going to experience some pain in the process, but it's very different than the pain of ending the life of your baby. And that's so important. And David is a testament to that, knowing that his life is here today. My life is here today because our mothers chose life at the end.
One of the greatest honors I've had in my career was to be invited to one of my former birth mom's weddings. She had gotten pregnant unexpectedly her first semester of college, chose adoption, and several years later was getting married, and she invited me to her wedding. And I didn't know because she hadn't shared it with anyone, but as she walked down the aisle, she had chosen to have some openness in her son's adoption plan. And so her son, who was her birth son, who was about 8 or 9 at the time, escorted her down the aisle alongside of her dad. So she had her arm, on each of them. And I just remember thinking, wow, like I remember working with her when she thought life is over. I'm never going to be able to accomplish the things I want. I'm never going to be able to give him the life that I envisioned. And to think that she had the support and the counseling, that she made a decision that she could live with, and then to it become this beautiful story, it's just amazing.
Oh my goodness, these are incredibly beautiful stories.
I think it's important to say, I think it's important to say too. I mean, look, adoption has a lot of different options, and I love those stories with openness and healthy families and healthy reunions. But openness is certainly not the best solution for everybody, and that's what I love about adoption, is that there's multiple options, and that's really empowering for women to be able to have that choice.
Right. I think you're totally right. What I would really love to do at this point, as we start to close out is here. I'm going to put it on gallery view for everyone. I think that works. I would love each of us to give kind of an action item. Like if people are really motivated and are like, okay, how do I even help, decrease the statistic between adoption and abortion and accomplish everything that all of us are saying that we should? What are some concrete ways that y'all would suggest people getting involved or doing something to help break the stigma of adoption?
Sure. So I can start. One of the things I would love is, and maybe I can share my screen. I don't know. Maybe I won't be able to, but if everyone can visit optionhope.com and look over Louisiana's curriculum, our Option Hope's curriculum for adoption. One of the cool things about this last legislative session is we expanded the law. Act 456 now requires very specific instruction in high schools about infant adoption. And what we really need is volunteers or even consultants or people who can work with us to expand this program across the state to make sure that they get information in their hands right away. I'm going to share this little screen. I don't know if y'all can see this. Is that okay, Alex, for a second? Okay. If you can see this postcard, this is the postcard that we made from our Option Hope curriculum that we want to be in every high school student's hands in the state of Louisiana. And this is in public high school. It's an amazing opportunity because likelihood is that these are the students that will face unplanned pregnancy. So we offer this card with them. And my hope is that, that card goes in their backpack. And then one day, 3 years later, they face an unplanned pregnancy and they think back on this card and they go to optionhope.com or they go to a pregnancy center or they go to an adoption agency and say, you know what, I had someone come speak to me about adoption. And now I know I can make an adoption plan. So we are looking for people to help us expand this program. So that's something actionable. And I just wanted to share that little postcard so y'all can kind of see what we're doing, but optionhope.com, and please contact us if you feel you know anyone who would love to present on adoption or who has an adoption story that they want to share in the high school setting.
Yeah, whichever would like to go next.
As far as action item, so November is National Adoption Month. And so I think it's just so important to just try to increase awareness and educate others. So whether it's sharing information on, social media about the option of adoption, Option Hope, any information from Louisiana Right to Life. I just think that sometimes it's amazing to me how many people are just not as educated on this topic. And so I just think that even spreading information, sharing a post, what have you, for someone, it could plant that seed that later on they, as Sarah shared, they might come back to. So just being a part of helping all of us work together to increase awareness and spread the word about the options women do have when facing a crisis pregnancy.
That's great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think the biggest thing is just to talk about the adoption option. And thankfully, we have these amazing resources like Sarah just talked about. And we have very unique resources with the documentary I Live in Park Rabbit and now LifeMark.
Yes.
People love seeing a movie, people love seeing a documentary, and it's a fun way to show the adoption option. And it does so in a way from all three perspectives in the adoption triad. So we really have a great opportunity to talk about adoption. So if you haven't seen LifeMark already, it is now streaming and releases on DVD and Blu-ray December 13th. And of course, you can see I Live in Park Avenue online now for free.
I think just sharing a resource with everyone like that, like I Live in Park Avenue or LifeMark, and start getting this into the hands of families, because that's how we change culture, right? Is getting resources to people. And it totally can change their perspective of seeing something like David's story. I think that that's something we've really worked hard to do. And now that LifeMark is out, we can definitely, Louisiana Right's Life is working to promote that. But remember, when we're promoting that, we're promoting that infant adoption can change lives, save a life from abortion. It can offer birth parents peace and hope and a future that they want, and also give that adoptee the future they want. So that's something I just wanted to echo from David, is these resources aren't just like, here, share a link. This is life-changing information that everyone needs to have.
And one final note, I guess I'd say, is that findhelpla.com website that I mentioned earlier. In fact, I fixed the chat for everyone a while back in this thing. I put on there 3 websites if you wanted to jot them down. findhelpla.com, optionhope.com, and then I put the adoption website for.
Can you add the LifeMark link? I think it's LifeMark. Do you know, David, the URL for that?
LifeMarkMovie.com.
LifeMarkMovie.com.
And then, of course, I live on Parker Avenue as well.
The note that I want to say for the Find Help LA website, we just made and ordered these wallet size, like little wallet size. I would have one to show you. It's in my purse on the other side of the house. Going through my toddlers to go get it would be a disaster. My beautiful toddlers, I love them. We just got these wallet sized cards for people to have and put in their wallets, or keep in the back of church, or put wherever, some people like to take little cards like that and drop them in public bathroom stalls or whatever. They are cards that are there for women who are in crisis pregnancy, and it just is pregnant, need help, go to findhelpla.com, find a resource near you. We expanded Find Help LA, like I said before, not only for pregnancy centers, but also to find adoption agencies and other social services, and you can just search by zip code for them. And it kind of lists off some of the resources that women can find, and it has some numbers. It even has an abortion recovery number and an abortion pill reversal number. So if that's something that you would like to have for yourself or for your church, or give your family and friends, definitely reach out, info@prolifelouisiana.org. And you can go online to our I don't know if it's up on our store. I need to double check that. And I'd be happy to give those to you. So that's some other tangible way that you can help.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to pull that up on my phone to show everybody. But yeah, it is online, and it will be everywhere online. I know Alex is working really hard to make sure that resource is available. So
yeah. Well, we did perfectly. It is 7:58. We wrapped up a really wonderful conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists here who did an amazing job and continue to do an amazing job talking about adoption. And thank you so much to our attendees who joined. It's right after Thanksgiving. This is, the attendance for this is not as high as others, but we're going to be taking this and putting it all over our social media, on our YouTube, taking sections of this and getting it out there. And so please help us do that. That would be great. And then we have another webinar already scheduled for this Lighting the Way in the Post-Roe Louisiana series. It's on Tuesday, December 13th. And it's specifically talking about the pregnancy centers and pregnant and parenting help in Louisiana. So that would be a great one. Help me spread the word on that as well. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful